She was tied to a rock in the hot sun. Then he returned. The rope had been cutting into her wrists for what felt like hours. The sun was not kind out here. It never was. In the open Texas flatlands, when the sky decided to punish you, there was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide, and nobody coming to save you. The dust burned the inside of your nose. The heat pressed down on your shoulders like hands trying to push you into the ground. And the silence. The silence was the worst part. Because silence meant you were truly alone. Clara Weston had not cried yet. She had decided she would not. She sat against that pale, flat rock with her wrists bound behind her back and her ankles tied with rough hemp rope, and she stared out at the horizon with dry eyes and a jaw set firm. She was 31 years old. She had been left before. She had been discarded before. She had been told she was not worth keeping before. But this was something different. This was cruelty on purpose, done in daylight, with witnesses who looked away. Her stepbrothers had done this, the men her father had brought into their home 12 years ago, when he married a woman with 2 grown sons, men who had smiled at the wedding and stolen from the pantry the same night. Men who had waited and waited and waited until her father was in the ground and the will was in their hands, and then they had looked at Clara like she was something stuck to the bottom of their boot. The homestead was hers by law. Her father had made sure of that. But the law out here was slow, and men with bad intentions were fast. They had dragged her out here 2 miles from the house, tied her to this rock like some kind of warning to herself, and Hollis, the older one, had crouched down in front of her and said, "You'll sign those papers when we come back for you tonight, or we'll leave you here for the buzzards to find." He had smiled when he said it. She had not given him the satisfaction of flinching. But now, 3 hours into the afternoon heat, with her lips cracking and her shoulders aching and the sun sitting directly above her like a cruel eye, Clara felt something she had not let herself feel in a very long time. She felt terrified. And right then, she heard hoofbeats. If you have ever loved a story about a woman who refused to break and the kind of man who noticed that, stay with me. This one is going to stay with you. And if stories like this comfort you the way they comfort me, please subscribe. New ones come every week. The rider came from the west, out of the glare, and for one horrible moment Clara thought it was Hollis coming back early. She pressed her back against the rock and lifted her chin. She would not beg. Whatever happened, she would not beg. But the horse that emerged from the heat shimmer was dark bay, not the spotted gray her stepbrother rode. And the man in the saddle was not Hollis. He was broader, quieter in the way he sat, still in a way that spoke of a man who had learned to move through the world without announcing himself. He wore a dusty black hat pulled low, and he had not shaved in what looked like several days, and when he pulled up short 20 yards from her and saw her sitting there against that rock in the sun, he went completely still. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then he dismounted. He walked toward her slowly, the way a person walks toward something they are not sure is real. His boots scuffed the dry ground. He stopped about 6 feet away and took off his hat and held it at his side, and Clara saw his face for the first time. She did not know this man. Or rather, she thought she did not. And then something shifted in his eyes, something like recognition crashing into disbelief, and he said, "Clara Prentice." She stared at him. "Clara Weston now," she said. Her voice came out rougher than she expected from the dry air. "My father passed." He crouched down in front of her, not too close, keeping distance like a man who understood that a frightened woman needs space first and help second. He looked at the ropes on her wrists, and something moved across his face that she could not quite name. Not pity, something harder than pity. "I'm going to cut those," he said. "That all right?" She nodded once. He pulled a knife from his belt and cut the rope at her wrists first, then moved to her ankles. He did it carefully, not rushing, not jerking, like the rope itself was something that deserved to be handled with care because it was touching her skin. When the last piece fell away, he sat back on his heels and gave her room. She brought her hands around in front of her and looked at the marks on her wrists, red and deep. "Who did this?" he said. It was not quite a question. She looked up at him. "You said my name like you knew me." "I did know you," he said. "A long time ago. I'm Eli Cade." The name moved through her like a warm current through cold water. Eli Cade. She had been 17 the last time she saw him. He had been 22, working for her father that last summer before he left for reasons nobody ever fully explained. She remembered him as quieter than the other hands, more careful, the kind of young man who returned things he borrowed and remembered to close the gate behind him. She had thought him handsome in that shy, observant way she had not known how to name at 17. He had left without saying goodbye, and she had told herself she did not care, and she had believed herself mostly. "You came back," she said. "I came back," he said. "Heard the ranch was in trouble. Didn't know how much trouble until about 2 minutes ago." He glanced at her wrists again. Can you stand? She could stand. She would stand. She stood up and her legs were shakier than she liked, and she grabbed the rock beside her until her balance found itself, and she straightened her spine and did not ask for his hand even though he had offered it without saying a word, just holding it there at a respectful distance in case she wanted it. She did not take it. She stood on her own. He nodded once like that answered something for him, and he went to his horse and pulled a canteen from the saddle and brought it back. She drank from it slowly, the way you make yourself drink when your body is screaming for more than your pride wants to accept. My stepbrothers, she said when she lowered the canteen. They want the homestead. They took me out here to force my hand. They coming back? Tonight, Hollis said. Eli was quiet for a moment. He put his hat back on. Then we need to be there first, he said. He helped her onto his horse, and she let him, because practicality was not weakness, and her legs were still unsteady from the heat. He walked the horse, leading it himself, all the way back toward her father's homestead. 2 miles of slow walking in the afternoon sun. He did not talk much. She did not either. But the silence between them was not the terrible kind. It was the kind you could rest inside, the kind that did not demand anything. When her father's house came into view, squat and pale against the wide flat sky, something in her chest tightened. She had grown up in that house, learned to read at the kitchen table in that house, sat on that porch with her father on summer evenings when the light went gold and the world felt endless and safe. She had planted the rose bush by the front steps herself, 15 years ago, and it still bloomed every spring like a stubborn, beautiful argument for staying. She was not going to lose that house. I have a proposal for you, she said, still looking at the house as they walked. Eli looked up at her on the horse. I know that sounds strange, she said, coming from a woman tied to a rock 20 minutes ago, but I need you to hear me out. I'm listening, he said. My father's will leaves everything to me, but my stepbrothers are contesting it, saying I am not capable of managing the property alone, and that as an unmarried woman I have no business holding land of that size. She paused. The law around here leans toward them, not because it is right, because it is what it is. Eli was quiet. If I had a husband, she said carefully, the contest would be harder to press. The land would belong to a household, not an unmarried woman, and I would not need a husband who meddles or controls or decides things for me. I would need a husband who respects the word partner and means it. More quiet. You are asking me to marry you, Eli said. I am asking you if you would consider a business arrangement that is also legally a marriage, she said. You would have a place to stay, full use of the working portion of the land, and the wages my father would have paid you. I would keep my home, and when the situation settles, we could decide together what comes next. He did not answer right away. She did not look at him. She kept her eyes on the house. What made you think I would say yes, he said. I did not think anything, she said quietly. You were there, you were kind, and you knew my father. She paused. Sometimes that is enough to ask on. He stopped walking. She looked down at him. He was studying the house the same way she had been, taking it in like something he recognized, or something he had carried in his memory for a long time and was now checking against the original. All right, he said. She blinked. All right? All right, he said again. But I want to be clear on something. Say it. I won't be a man who takes and doesn't give back, he said. Whatever this arrangement is, I hold up my half of it. You won't be managing this place alone. She held his gaze for a moment. I can live with that, she said. They were married 3 days later by the town preacher, with no guests except old Mrs. Albright from the post office who had known Clara's father and cried through the whole short ceremony for reasons that had nothing to do with joy and everything to do with grief and time. Hollis and his brother Robert showed up the evening of the wedding. Clara was still in the kitchen when she heard the horses. She moved to the window and watched them dismount in the yard, and she felt that familiar cold thread of dread move through her stomach. But before she could move to the door, Eli was already on the porch. She could not hear the full conversation, but she heard enough. She heard Hollis's voice rise sharp and then drop into something uglier and quieter when Eli did not move from the top step. She heard Robert say something she did not catch. She heard Eli's voice, low and even, the kind of voice that does not need volume to land with weight. Then she heard the horses leave. Eli came back inside. He hung his hat by the door and washed his hands at the basin the way a man does when he is done with a day's work and is moving on to the next thing. They'll be back, he said. I know, she said. Then we'll be ready, he said. She had not expected it to be easy. She had not expected much at all. She had expected to survive, which was different. But the weeks that followed were not merely survival. They were something quieter and stranger than that. Eli worked from first light to last like a man with something to prove, but not to anyone watching. He fixed the fence line along the east pasture that her stepbrothers had let go to rot. He repaired the barn roof before the summer storms came. He treated the two remaining horses with a gentleness that made Clara stop what she was doing sometimes just to watch. He did not ask for praise, he did not explain himself, he just worked. And when evenings came and they sat on the porch in the cooling air, he talked, slowly, carefully, the way a man talks when he is not used to talking but is making an effort because he thinks the other person deserves the effort. He told her about the years after he had left, the cattle drives, the failed attempt at his own small ranch in New Mexico, the winter he had spent working for a sheep farmer in Colorado just to eat. He told her about his wife Rebecca, who had died of fever 4 years ago, and the way he said her name was so careful and private that Clara felt she was watching something sacred. She told him things too, about her father's long illness and the way it had made the house quieter year by year, about her stepbrothers moving in like cold drafts under a door you can never quite seal, about the way she had started sleeping with a rifle by her bed 8 months ago when things had started going missing from the property. "You haven't been safe for a long time," he said one evening. She looked out at the darkening sky. "No," she said, "I haven't." He was quiet for a moment. "You are now," he said. She did not answer, but something in her chest, some tight wound old thing she had been carrying for so long she had stopped noticing its weight, loosened just slightly. She was not ready to believe it yet, but she was beginning to think she might be willing to try. It was a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after the wedding, when Clara found the little girl. She was behind the barn, tucked into the corner where the old fence met the stone foundation, small and still, as something trying to disappear. She could not have been more than 5 years old. Dark hair, dark eyes, a dress that had once been green and was now more dust than color. Clara crouched down slowly. "Hello," she said. The girl stared at her. "Are you hungry?" The girl blinked, then, very slowly, she nodded. She had been left. That much became clear quickly. Her name was Nora. She had come with a wagon train passing through 3 days ago. Her mother had gotten sick on the trail, and then her mother had not gotten better. And then Nora had found herself alone, and small, and afraid, and had started walking without knowing where she was going until she had found the barn and decided it was safe enough to stop. Clara brought her inside and fed her without once saying the words, "We have to figure out what to do with you," because she already knew. When Eli came in from the field for midday and found a small, dark-haired girl eating cornbread at his kitchen table with the calm focus of someone who had been hungry a long time, he stopped in the doorway. Clara looked at him from across the kitchen. He looked at the girl. The girl looked at him with the careful measuring gaze of a child who has learned that most adults are something to be assessed before trusted. Eli crouched down to her level. "You like horses?" he said. Nora thought about it. "I don't know," she said. "I never been close to one." "You want to see one after you eat?" Another careful pause. Then a small nod. He looked up at Clara. She was watching him with something in her eyes that she quickly moved her gaze away from because it was too much to feel in the middle of a Tuesday morning. "She staying?" he said quietly. "If she wants," Clara said. Eli stood up, moved to the basin, and washed his hands. "Good," he said. That was all. The trouble with her stepbrothers came to a head on a Thursday evening in late August when the air smelled like lightning before it arrived and the cattle were restless in the pasture. They came with 3 other men Clara did not recognize, and they came at dusk when the light was low enough to blur what you were seeing. Hollis had papers, he said. Papers from a judge in the next county, he said. Papers that declared the original will invalid. Eli came out of the barn when he heard the horses. Clara stood on the porch with Nora behind her inside the house, one small hand holding the back of Clara's skirt through the door. "You need to leave this property," Eli said. "You have no standing here," Hollis said. "This marriage isn't real, and any judge would say so." "The judge in Laredo would disagree," said a voice from the gate. Everyone turned. Sheriff Tom Ardell, who had known Clara's father for 30 years and had been quietly watching the situation with these stepbrothers for several months, rode through the gate with 2 deputies at his side. He held up a paper of his own. "Court ruled this morning," he said. "The Cade homestead, all property associated, stands with Clara Cade as sole legal owner. The previous contest has been dismissed." He looked at Hollis with the particular patience of a man who has been doing this work for a long time and is tired of certain kinds of people. "These men are trespassing. You have about 60 seconds to decide how you'd like the rest of this evening to go." They left. They did not come back. The storm that had been threatening all evening finally broke an hour later, rain coming down in silver sheets across the flat land, drumming on the roof of the house that was hers, that had always been hers, that would remain hers. Clara stood at the kitchen window and watched it come down. Eli came and stood beside her. They watched the rain together without saying anything for a long moment. "Thank you," she said finally. "You did this," he said. "I just helped with the edges." She turned to look at him. She had been telling herself for weeks now that this was a business arrangement, that she was a practical woman, that gratitude was not the same as feeling, that safety was not the same as love, that a quiet evening on a porch was not a courtship, that a man being kind to an orphaned child was not something to read into. She had been telling herself a great many things. "Eli," she said. "Clara," he said. And then she stopped talking with words entirely. She reached out and took his hand where it rested against the windowsill, and she held it, and he turned his hand over and held hers back. And neither of them said anything else for a very long time, because everything that needed saying had already been said in the slow weeks of working and talking and sitting and watching a little girl learn to trust a horse and a man and a house and a woman who was learning to believe that she could be worth staying for. The wedding had been for the law. This moment, quiet and rain-washed, with the storm outside and the lamp burning low, and a little girl asleep in the back bedroom with a rag doll she had named after the bay horse, was something else entirely. This was the real thing. 3 months later, on a cool November morning when the light came in pale and clean through the kitchen window, Nora came padding in barefoot from the bedroom, rubbing her eyes, and looked up at Clara standing at the stove. "Can I call you Mama?" she said. The word landed so softly in the room that for a moment Clara was not sure she had heard it right. She turned around slowly. Nora was looking up at her with those careful, measuring eyes that had been measuring for a long time and had finally reached a conclusion. Clara went down on her knees on the kitchen floor and took that little girl in her arms and held her, and she did not cry. She breathed. She had been left at a rock in the hot sun. She had been told she was not worth keeping. She had been a woman alone in a house full of silence and fear for a very long time. And now she was a mother in her own kitchen, holding a child who had chosen her, loved by a man who had come back when he was needed, standing on land that was hers, on a morning that smelled like coffee and wood smoke and the particular sweetness of a life that had finally become safe. Eli appeared in the doorway a moment later, hat in hand, and saw the two of them on the floor. He did not say anything. He just leaned against the doorframe and smiled the quiet smile of a man who does not know how to say that this is everything he needed, so he lets himself stand inside it instead. Outside, the rose bush her father had planted was still growing, and inside, Clara Cade was home. If this story moved something in you, I would love to know. Leave a comment and tell me which part stayed with you the most. And if you are watching from somewhere far away, tell me where. This little community of ours is full of beautiful people from all over the world, and knowing you are there makes every story worth telling. Please subscribe if you have not yet. There is always another story waiting, and I promise it will be worth your time.